Hello, and welcome to Traverse. My name is Franziska Eri. I'm a theatre and opera director talking to you from the Ram Theatre in Budapest, Hungary. Every week, I'll be talking to different industry professionals from all over the world about their careers, the shifts and adjustments they had to make during this pandemic, and their hopes and dreams for the future. This is Traverse. What's next for our industry?
Justin Mabardi is a creative director and television director with experience in production and development of live stage shows and live shows for TV. He has worked on shows of every scale in more than 20 countries. His creative direction has been featured on network television shows around the world, including but not limited to Dancing with the Stars, American Idol, Bring the Funny, and World's Got Talent. Justin also has 20 years of production supervision and professional stage management under his belt. He worked on 2 tours of the Tony Award-winning musical Fosse and on Rock of Ages on Broadway. Last year, Justin and his team had to produce American Idol from home, which was a big adjustment for him, and also for TV as an industry.
Hi, Justin. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks so much for having me.
No, thank you for being here. Where are you at the moment?
I'm currently in Los Angeles. I just got here about a week ago, and I'm here for another few days before I head back home.
And where is home?
Oh, sorry, home is New York City. So I bounce back and forth quite a lot between LA and New York. That tends to be well, actually, to be fair, I mostly just live in New York and I mostly just work in LA. So I end up coming out to LA quite a bit.
And is that still possible with the current pandemic restrictions and everything?
Yeah, in the US, it is still possible. There are state regulations. So once you arrive in a different state, depending on the state, you have to then quarantine for a certain number of days. And you can sort of what they call test out of quarantine, meaning that after, I think, 4 days in a place after you've quarantined, you can get a second test. And that will sort of declare you eligible to leave your quarantine. So that works.
Yeah, it seems to be quite straightforward. And what's it like, well, in both places? How open are you guys right now?
Well, New York it's interesting. I actually bounce back and forth between LA and New York at times when those cities I was leaving was going into like a more dramatic lockdown. So I left last year, mid-March, which is when it really hit the United States, from New York to LA. New York was, of course, in the midst of like a several months lockdown, very severe outbreak in the city. LA was still very cautious, but certainly not anywhere like New York. At the time, though, we were about to go into studio for American Idol, and we ended up having to produce the entire show from home. So we ended up sending 3 iPhones or an audio equipment, lighting equipment, scenic elements that we could figure out to all these different contestants around the country. We're just on endless 16-hour Zooms trying to help them, set the shot, figure out what the background was, figure out the audio equipment. It was exciting in a weird way, obviously, but also exhausting. And at the end, I suppose, really rewarding because we were the first out of the gate to really turn up the production value on an at-home version of a show like that.
Yeah, tell me about that. So how does a show so big make that transition? What sort of creative decisions did you have to make, and was it like a team effort? Did you have a vision?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I'm on that show as a creative producer, and so our executives in the network had to make a difficult decision to not go into the studio. At that point, actually, it wasn't difficult; it was forced upon everyone. There was no way to go into the studio, and so we still wanted to make the show somehow because it was already airing. All of the pre-taped episodes had been airing. And so we decided somehow through a technical guardian of amazing talent, figured out how to get a weekly program up with shooting conditions ranging, from all over the country. No Wi-Fi, cellular connection, this, that, and the other. It was crazy. It was really hard, and it was a big team effort. And it almost took more effort and time for us than a normal studio show. because it just took that much more time to explain, how to zoom something, or how, every all of those details in every shot is something that's very systematic in normal television world. And it's certainly not for, the grandmothers and cousins of, Joe Smith in the middle of God knows where. So the point is, like, we just had to, like, really, like, very step by step help everyone through all the technology, capture the shots we needed, make sure it was fair, make sure it was all of the things that are required by the competition rules. To be honest, I can't even remember much other than going between my bed and my desk. Really, that was it.
That sounds like almost everyone else's 2020, just maybe a tiny bit more stressful.
Yeah, it was a different deal for sure.
Let me ask a little bit more about this, because I have no TV experience, so I'm fascinated by this.
Sure.
How uniform can you make that then, when you basically hand over, almost like a creative, you give creative agency to everyone through these Zooms, presumably.
Yeah, as a creative director on a show like that, we try and find, let's say, the best looking corner of someone's apartment, or if they have an outdoor garden, maybe we'll go there. And if they do, we need to send them some additional lighting so that they still look, correct for television, let's say. And we try and help them with the outfits they have at home. This might look good, with this backdrop. We need a different color so that you pop on top. Those sorts of choices, and not always working perfectly. But I would say we got away with a lot of it, and in terms of, like, we were able to put together something that was interesting. We were able to ship people things and get them stuff that was helpful for their setup at home. It was just a lot of coordination. It was like 400 boxes a week being shipped all over the country of,
Gosh.
whatever you need to get a TV show done, but in, like, 20 different locations.
Do you think there is a recipe for it now after you've done that?
The feedback we got that was rewarding or possibly comforting at that point in the pandemic was that people really enjoyed seeing into their homes, and that was kind of an interesting take on it. Well, I don't know. We'll see what they do this year, but this year's looking promising that everyone's back in the studio. So I imagine that will be the case. But uh, yeah, I mean, it worked. I mean, I don't know how else to put it than it worked. It happened. It worked. People were happy about it. I don't know if people want to see that every year. It sort of depends. Like, the temperature of people's interest changes on a regular basis. So in a pandemic, being at home, it's probably interesting to see into other people's homes. But a lot of TV is can be escape and fantasy, like a storytelling journey. It's important to see that in different people who are on television, whether or not they're characters or competitors or whatever the case is.
Did you find some sort of fragility in this? The fact that something like this, like a pandemic, can just completely change even the plans of a TV show. And is there something that you learned from this, you think, as someone who's had a lot of experience with TV?
Yeah, I mean, there is a certain amount of resilience that TV has, and now that you can basically record anywhere in very high quality, you know, for network television, essentially. There's something really interesting about the fact that TV can really continue. At the same time, like, my job sort of becomes, more complicated. I think it's, what I'm used to doing is major stage performances, all of the elements required for that, graphics, lighting, choreography, style, all of those details. But composing a picture from someone's home with their stuff is kind of a different talent. And honestly, like, in terms of home styling, like, I'm horrible at that. Like, I always call my friends because that's just not my skill. So I was flexing a muscle I didn't really, you know, have comfort in. So I was really trying to help them with their stage presence and the lighting elements, and if there was any sort of, like, cool TikTok-y kind of vibe that we could get into, their bedrooms, or the kind of lighting, all that strip lighting that people were using. So, you just try and find details that resonate with everybody.
And you mentioned that the show is probably moving to the studio. For those who don't know much about TV, I'm wondering, like, is there some sort of protocol or any sort of training in socially distanced filming? What's the deal with the Corona and TV right now?
Yeah, so I just wrapped on a couple shows. So I'm also the creative director for Dancing with the Stars, and we were the first show, I believe, back in the studio live for those sorts of competition shows and with people dancing. So in that scenario, every sort of couple was isolated or podded with like their hair and makeup person and the couple, and I think there was another person, maybe an audio tech, people that really have to interact with them up close and personal on a regular basis. They would be podded in a smaller group.
Mm.
And a lot of our pros are married to one another, so we had to separate them because if one of them went down, then both of them went down, then four people go out of the show instead of just two. So then the crew is zoned effectively based on your proximity to talent who may or may not have a mask on. So you have zones A and B, for example. A tends to be people who are on the floor interacting with talent in any significant way. And at that point, you have to wear a mask and a shield, and you have to try and keep your distance at the same time. We were really successful at that. I mean, it's not a perfect. I mean, nothing's a perfect system, but like ABC and the BBC outdid themselves in terms of like making sure that we were well tested. Well, we were podded, we were zoned, we were masked, the whole thing. We decided as a show to try and limit the amount of stuff we were going to bring in and out of the studio. So like big props or scenic elements. I tried to really pare that back as much as possible, or at least not have a lot of things coming in and out of the studio during a show where people might need to funnel into a space. We ended up redesigning parts of the studio to utilize a lot more LED in the room, which for me traditionally I try and stay away from. But we ended up making it look really nice because we had no audience and we needed to fill, sort of the different spaces in the room for sure.
Why do you not like LED? Is it an aesthetic choice?
No, I mean I love LED as a tool, but I don't love too much LED in a space that is supposed to feel like a location, like a home that we return to on a regular basis.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned set and limiting set, and I was wondering if does digital set painting or projection mapping, can that help and replace practical sets?
I think it can to varying degrees of success so far. I think that if you have the time to edit well and make sure that it resonates to the home audience, yes, I think that you can use projection mapping and AR and mixed reality, XR, whatever, in order to get there. I think that it really, again, sort of depends on how you use technology to try and imply a different kind of world on a regular basis. I think it can take center stage, and I think that's what I don't want for it, especially on a show like Dancing with the Stars. Dancing with the Stars is a really, fun format that needs to feel like the question needs to always be at the center of the stage. Like, can this, celebrity dance? Not like, are we the coolest show on the planet? We are a very technically advanced show, but we try and hide that
Mm.
as much as possible because I don't think that that is what matters to the audience. Whereas like maybe like X Factor can use those sorts of tools in a different way, for example, or get away with more, let's say. I have done a lot of research and development in the mixed reality field for other kinds of shows, so I think that it can be helpful on certain kinds of formats, and certainly on films and sort of scripted television. Live television, I think it just has a varying effect. I thought that on the Super Bowl halftime show, The Weeknd did a great job in that opening portion with it.
Yeah, it was designed by Ez Devlin, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was beautiful. I thought that especially that opening sequence was a very good use of sort of XR with scenic elements in a way that you kind of didn't know which was what and what was happening.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about this research and development you mentioned. Was there anything that you found surprising or something that you weren't expecting?
I think that at the beginning it was mostly based on AR, VR sort of concepts. And so VR was very a tricky thing for television companies, or sorry, production companies, to want to involve themselves in, because of course it blocks the eyes and stuff. And so when AR started to really take steps forward, then that was interesting, but it wasn't enough. It was only the background and the foreground. Then when XR, or no, mixed reality came around, it was easier because you could use LED. But now that XR is really sort of like a very clear way of, and a process that you can take to a company, I think that learning curve was interesting for me to be a part of, and to develop things, to pitch to networks and understand why things don't work and why things work and what's important to them. And that's when I, based on what I just said, essentially, that's when I sort of made an opinion about what really works well for that kind of technology, particularly in the performance field. Now, if you were able to really isolate an artist and pre-record something, I think you can make something really spectacular. I sort of look at it from the sense of live. And I think
Yeah.
that live can be really tricky.
Yeah, I was about to ask you that because obviously you have incredible TV and live TV experience, but you also have some stage experience. And I wanted to ask you about now that theater and opera and live music is also streamed, do you see any sort of overlap or any sort of competition with all this digital material? Or is there anything that you think theater and opera could do a bit better when it comes to broadcasting?
I don't know that there is competition yet in that way. I think it's great for live stage shows, theatrical based shows, to put out their content for revenue, particularly for people who can't make it there. I don't think it's a better experience. Theater's not really made for TV. Opera's not really made for TV. So unless if you really restage it for television, or recreate it as a TV show, a lot can get lost in the connection. And I mean that from the human experience. I don't mean it like, could it, should it? Yes, sure. Everything, yes, could, should. But in terms of just sort of recording a Broadway show for the sake of recording a Broadway show and putting it out there, I tend to feel like that's an error in terms of quality of content. But there are many reasons to do it that are not based on quality of content, And I think that that's the tricky part. I find them to be more and more two distinct worlds. And I come from a theatrical background, actually. So I was a theatrical stage manager for, 15 years or so. And so, theater is kind of my first love like that. And television has sort of opened up a lot of other avenues that I'm more interested in now. I think that it's all very possible. I think, but what theater tries to hold on to emotionally is not what television is able to do for them.
And do you think technology like mixed reality could be a way into that? Like, can I enjoy a theatrical show, a stage show in my living room? Will I ever get to that point where I will get the same feeling?
I don't think it's possible that you can have the same feeling. But I don't think it's the reason not to try. I think that you could probably find something completely different and use all the tools that we know from shows on television or theater shows to put it into a new technology. Of course, all of those you're trying to trigger the same senses of the human, and how you achieve that differs on each, kind of platform, let's say.
You mentioned it a little bit, so I thought I would just divert the gaze to your journey as a maker. Would you tell us how you ended up in television?
I grew up I grew up in Santa Barbara, California, and applied to a bunch of universities, and the one I wanted to go to accepted me incorrectly into the theater arts program. And I have no theater background leading up to that, no interest in theater leading up to that. But I was applying as a business major, and somehow the application got rerouted, something happened. And so I decided that I was going to take the spot, but I was going to change my major like immediately on arrival. When I got there, one of the professors convinced me to take theory of color and a light design course. I ended up loving it, and I ended up being really shit at business. So I stayed in the major and ended up working in theatrical light design and then in stage management after I spent some summers working at Disneyland. And when I got out of school, I ended up working as a stage manager all over the world for a good 15 years. And I worked for Disney. I worked for Franco Dragone, who is one of the leading directors from Cirque du Soleil, who then founded his own company. We ended up on Le Rêve together in Las Vegas,
Mm.
and then the House of Dancing Water in Macau. I toured with a show called Fosse for a few years. I was in Moscow for 42nd Street. I was in Germany doing an Indian circus. Like I did a lot of stuff all over the world. And then when America's Got Talent moved to New York, there was an opportunity to move over to that show on the creative team. And one of the great things about the creative team on that show is that you move quick. You conceptualize big ideas, and you have the machine behind you to support all these different artists who are coming in to compete on the show. It is a different skill set all the way around because you're then taking each of these groups and working with them, and some have different, varying levels of production background or ability to move quickly, come up with new ideas. And so you're working with them to try and find what their performance is actually going to be on television. Same to what we were just talking about. How do you take kind of a theater-based performance and then recreate it for a television show? And that is something that can be really challenging for a lot of these artists or some of them are like very up for it because it's so exciting. Some of them are very stringent, and you have to find your way because your intention is just to get their performance to look its best for an audience who are all seated at home. And so that's a very it can be a challenging conversation to have for some people, because I think that in the way that my gut instinct from a theater perspective, you have to sort of bury it for a second, and you have to really focus on how you're going to make that emotion translate for television. So that's how I got into sort of creative directing, and so I sort of built off of that experience onto a bunch of different other shows around the world. And then also I started to multi-camera direct kind of different shows here in the US. And that's a great other experience because it's more similar. It's actually a balance of my creative eye with my stage management eye. It's a very technical process, but you have to have a creative eye to make it look incredible.
And surely that's not something you can learn on the job, or is it?
I was fortunate to have some really talented directors help me. So I worked with our director on AGT, Russ Norman. I trained with him for a few weeks, and then through a program at NBC, I was able to work with Phil Hayes, who I love and adore. This man, he and I work together on like a daily basis most of the year on the creative side, and so he was able to help me learn a lot on another show that he was directing. And then there's an incredible director here in town called Alex Rosinski, who NBC paired me with to learn how to do scripted performances, and that means from a musical perspective. So I got to learn, mostly through those three. I had a bit of a mentorship with Don Roy King Jr., who is kind of the SNL director. And that was all really nice because you're learning a bunch of different ways of approaching the same problem from people who are at the top of their craft. Did I learn on the job? No. Did I learn, did I kind of apprentice? Kind of. Did I get thrown in too early? Maybe. Who knows? You never know. I mean, you don't know until you're doing it, and you only know at that moment if you're doing it well enough and if you're paying attention enough to improve your skills on a regular basis. So I'm trying.
You're doing great, I think. From the sound of it. Did it ever become too much or too big? Do you have an experience where you were like, that kind of got out of hand for me?
In directing, no. In creative directing, I have kind of a forgiveness formula. I think it's really important to take a swing at big things, and you have to know the moment where you have to pull the cord and triage it. So you're trying to like always up the game, make it more incredible, make it more beautiful. But if you realize that failure is in your midst, you either double down or you try and find something else that will work for television. In general, on these shows, I think it's more important to check your ego and see where you are in terms of like, is this for me or is this for the show? Oh, it's for me? Great, move on. Switch it, move it, let's go. And really keep yourself in check that way. When it comes to stage management, I would say that, yeah, I've been in a few situations. I remember doing the Middle East International Film Festival once, and really like half hour to show, not knowing what the show was.
That's horrible. That's
I used to,
terrifying.
I used to have this recurring nightmare that I would show up to my call script and not know what show I was calling. And it kind of happened that day. And, it was two walkies and a cell phone and a headset and another headset trying to, coordinate all of this nonsense. But it was successful. It's just, it's also serious in that moment because if you're dealing with things like, big automation, you can really injure people if you don't have it right. And you have to know yourself in that moment to say like, I'm out of my depths. We need to not move that, or I don't know what the answer is. I don't have it clear. I can't see it. You have to be able to just stop a show. In this, for the sake of someone's safety, obviously. So I think that, I had a lot of great experiences early on in my career. Some of them fortuitous, some of them earned. It's the kind of thing that gets you moving in your career. Hopefully, if you get those opportunities early.
And you mentioned the next thing, upping the game. Where do you think TV is headed? And do you think this pandemic has changed things at all for television?
For the long term, I don't know, because I see the one thing I think is clear is that remote work is very possible. So the need to be in the office 5 days a week, I think will change. Maybe on the news is a good example. So many people are like reporting from home that we're now used to varying degrees of quality of camera, we want to say streaming.
Yeah, on our screens, yeah.
I think that as a world, we all sort of have like embraced the fact that, TikTok level quality or FaceTime level quality is good enough, which I don't think that we would have accepted before. It's going to take time for us to get audiences back into theaters and into TV audiences, but it will come. I mean, I can't see why it wouldn't. I'm actually really optimistic, which is probably one of my worst features.
Or the best.
I'm always blindsided. Yeah, I mean, there's something really important about the human connection, about being in person with people. And particularly, I think creating is actually not easier from home.
Yeah.
With a group, let's say. I think that you can put together an idea and a pitch and all that on your own. I think, in fact, it's probably better to do it at home because you can be more focused. For me, seemingly back on track to try and be in the same spaces that we were in before. So I'm actually happy with that, to be honest.
Yeah, I think we all are. What's your advice to someone who wants to work in TV right now?
To work in television, I think that a lot of working in television is really about trust, which is kind of like anywhere else, obviously. For television, it's a lot more about compromise, which is something that someone reminded me of last year. Film, you can be very much clear about what it is specifically. Television, all day, all night, is compromise. It's trying to find a way to get the best scenario on television given your circumstances. And that's just what it is. So practice compromise and also start at the bottom. It's it is actually the best way. Come in as as a PA or an associate producer, and start where you can, be where you are, and work with the people who understand you and who can develop with you, because that's really, I think that I'm as guilty of this as anyone, but you sort of get attracted to the big shiny objects that are out there in those jobs, and that, that whatever, that clout, that status. The reality is that it's better if you're a creative, it's better for you to create at the level that you're at, let's say, in the moment that you're in, because your time will come up when it's time for you to shine on the biggest platforms, if you have your system, because not every system is the same.
Yeah, and
I
presumably
don't even know if that was a good answer.
it is a good answer. Of course it's a good answer. That's a great answer.
I think that platforms are changing, ever changing, and the cell phone has revolutionized how to put content out and how to film it, how to capture it. I mean, the iPhone, I mean, it's what I use, but it's incredible. It's an incredible tool that is literally in everyone's pockets to work from. That's not necessarily television. Television itself is a very clear thing right now, but other platforms are coming out strong. And the younger you are, the more you're used to using those sorts of platforms.
And what about Netflix and streaming places? Have you seen any change in your audience since streaming has become a bit more widespread?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, right now the streaming game is the big win. Network television is actually, I think, quite stable. We had a jump in our ratings this year on dancing, but it's not pulling in what it used to. So I think that they're trying to figure out what that means for the future of this platform, of television as a platform. Because from a network perspective, that's my guess. I think that, production companies are like, television is always going to be produced as an idea, but the difference between a streaming platform and sort of a monthly subscription, to 60 channels, I think that's debatable.
Mm. And my other question was if you can recall a project or any sort of piece you were working on that actually was a challenge, but you overcame it and you're proud of it.
I'm sure. I mean, like every project. I'll take it back 20 years. I can't believe I can say that, but the first job I was ever offered when I moved to New York, actually, ironically, was a tour, and it was the tour of Fosse the musical. And I will never forget going into the office of this touring company and seeing this man there at the front desk. And he said, can I help you? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I'm looking for a job as a stage manager. Of course, I had just moved to New York a year prior. 9/11 had happened. Like, there was no Broadway jobs that I was eligible for at the time. So he looked it over and he said, I think someone will get in touch with you. I said, okay, great. I go home, and a few days later, I get a call, and the production manager on the show, he was like, well, apparently you're the guy to call. And I was like, and I didn't know what that meant at the time. And so he said, have you toured before? I said, no. I said, can you read music? I said, no. He said, hold on one second. He came back, he goes, you got the job. And I said, well, great, what's it for? It is for this show, Fosse. And at the time, I didn't know anything about Bob Fosse in any real way. I knew some of his work, obviously. I ran to my neighbor. She taught me how to count beats and bars. And I went out to Topeka, Kansas, met a cast who was ready to challenge me at every turn. And I was 23, taking on this international, Broadway musical. I don't think they knew how old I was. I don't know, whatever. So we toured for 2 years, and it was very challenging at first, incredibly challenging.
Mm.
And over time, I sort of just figured it out, got the job done, and started to enjoy it. Then we got to Paris, and we were there, I forget, for a couple months, let's say. And it was the closing night party, and the man from the front desk was there. And I go, oh my God, you're the guy I gave my resume to. So it's really nice to see you again. Um, and I had always assumed that he was a receptionist. He goes, Justin, my name's Ken Gentry. I own this company. I think that those sorts of experiences have been, fruitful in my life. I've been in the right place at the right time, met the right person. I'm diligent about getting out there, and I try and be as friendly and polite and considerate as possible. But it's really important to get out there, get people to see you, understand your talents and your work and your background. The more human you are, the better, I think, to other people. And then, with time, they build trust and also a bit of a legacy about your work pattern and habits and people that will speak highly of you and get back in touch with you. I still get, messages from that company 20 years later.
That's wonderful.
So I would say that was probably my biggest, youngest challenge.
That's quite a story. I can't believe you thought that that was just a receptionist. That's incredible.
Whoops.
Lucky. um, Justin, it was amazing chatting to you. And I have a question for you, which I ask from every guest. If you were here with me in this auditorium, and if anything were possible, what would you like to make in this space?
I think I would invite my friend Kira Lehman, who is this incredible director and choreographer in Chicago, out with me to create something for the first time. She's my best friend since we were kids, and we've never worked together. And I think that it would be really nice to create something with her in a space that could be as beautiful as that for an audience. I think that in terms of what it would be, I mean, it would be bananas, but it would be good.
We like bananas.
I would bring very talented friends in to create something beautiful and special. I think that that's kind of the best way to approach it. I don't know what exactly I would do. I'm very bad at knowing exactly what I'm doing for lunch. So, but just start. Yeah, if you start selling tickets, I'll come in and get going.
I see how it goes. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Traverse, and sharing your thoughts with us. And please stay well and stay safe, even though I
Thank
know
you, and
you're
you too.
hopping, but still try to take care of yourself.
Exactly. Thanks for having me. It was great chatting.
This was Traverse. Thank you so much for joining us, and join us next time to see what's next for our industry.